Hi. So it'll take a second to set up, but thank you everyone for being here. Today today we're going to talk about a topic that I've been researching for a couple of years now, and has to do with how countries agree to transfer a technology at a national state, at a national level. We're not talking about when a private company decides to go to another country and do private investment in another country, as foreign private investment, but when states agree into, for example, setting a standard for what you might call issues that require coordination at a national level. Examples of these are, for example, you might have heard of 5G connections, you might have heard of information systems, and so forth. And I started this research thinking that what I was going to find was a very typical dispute between the United States and China in Latin America. I think a lot of people would think about that, right? Oh, of course, the US and China are competing in Latin America to get those private public contracts. What I ended up finding was that that's what paper said, but in reality, a lot of other competitors were into play. You had South Korean companies, you had Japanese companies, you had French companies, you had Norwegian companies, Swedish companies. So why was all research focused on the US-China competition? And was China really having the role and impact that the media and of course, a lot of these researchers were saying it had? In some aspects, yes. In others, maybe we could argue that not so much. So for example, if we talk about 5G connections, here you see Latin America, how these 5 main competing companies have either gotten these contracts or installed capacities in 5G across countries. And what you might see is that actually Ericsson and Nokia are the main competitors in this area, with, of course, Huawei having a lot compared to Samsung, but not as much as these other 2 competitors, right? So why is this? Was it because there were some value clashes among the Chinese companies and the regional companies? Was it because of geopolitical tensions? What we know is it wasn't because of economic incentives, because through the interviews I conducted during the period I was researching this, something that came out a lot is quality of Huawei products is good. It is very easy to negotiate with Huawei, and also is cheaper than the alternatives. So if it's cheaper, if it's easy to negotiate with them, if it's good quality, why aren't they having the presence that we would expect in the region? So I tried to get around, okay, so where is the US? The US is non-present, at least in 5G. The US companies invest in Latin America in a private capacity rather than competing in these public contracts, at least in the countries we were looking at. And one thing that we did see is that public opinion on both the US and China, Latin America, is not getting better, or at least very stable. It's like 50-50 in a lot of things. This is a very good study conducted between 2020 and 2021 that sees which words are associated with both countries. Yes, pizza, Eiffel Tower, I know, it's funny. What you can see here is that, of course, during COVID-19, the virus in China was like the main word that was associated with the country, right? Nothing else. And if you see, like, the only country that is, like, apart, like the US, yeah, it's very, like, power, capitalism, liberty. It's the first thing that comes to people's mind. And Japan, technology, was the first word that came to people's mind. Oh, thank you. Can I move? Yeah. So I'm going to skip this because it will take me like 10 minutes to explain this slide and this one. But what I wanted to say is, like, in general, people are very skeptic about how technologies are implemented in a country and how their data is used when it comes to the government. In Latin America, both the US and China have economic interests. The US has a lot of investment in Latin America, not so much in South America. And in terms of economic influence in companies, we do see that Xiaomi has a lot of participation in the region. But Samsung, of course, South Korean company, is way ahead in terms of sales, basically. So after conducting interviews, after doing the research, what we came up with is China is not the main investor in a lot of countries, not all, in other countries it is. Europe was the largest regional investor as a whole. Japan and Canada are growing in influence. The US share is also increasing. During the pandemic, Sweden, France, and Turkey were the only investors that increased their participation in the region. Could be weird, but I'll let that to you. And technology and communication investment accounted for 50%. So I'm not going to go over the limitations, we can discuss it later. What we did was we conducted interviews, and then we also wanted to know what was the media saying about these about these technological contracts with companies. What was the media saying? Was the media somehow shaping the decisions of decision makers? Because during the interviews, something that we did see was a lot of decision makers and both technical and more political profiled decision makers said that they were concerned about what the media and public opinion were saying in the China-US matter. This is something that we did noticed. So what we did was we checked several media outlets and around 1,000 articles on 5G, and we wanted to know what were the media saying about 5G connections in Latin America. So we basically created this association of words, and then we run it, and these are the results. So Huawei, of course, goes way ahead any other company, and this is interesting. A lot of the discussion on 5G is a discussion about Huawei, more even than a discussion about China. Other thing is that Chile appears a lot, and that's because Chile was one of the first countries in deploying 5G in the region. So a lot of countries use it as a reference. Actually, here you can see this is what Colombia used as a reference, and you can see that Chile, Mexico, and Brazil are the ones that they are comparing their system with. Of course, development. So there is an association between technological implementation and development that's interesting. And when you just run it, you can see that there are some ways words are associated. And everything that has to do with Huawei is United States, China, while everything that has to do with networks goes more with development and speed and connections. But then if you code it, what you will see is that there is also security threat coming up. Chile is a big word for some reason. And in Chile, it's more about development, while in Colombia, it's more about connectivity. And those, you can check all the results later. But there were differences between the three countries we compared. So this is Argentina. While in Argentina, everything that has to do with security is much more important. In Colombia, it's a mix between security and infrastructure. And in Chile, the security issue is almost non-existent. They are more focused on this is business and this is what we are going to choose. By the way, Huawei through a local company did not win all the connections in 5G in Chile. It was pretty much divided between Nokia and Nokia Ericsson. So these are the main conclusions, but what I wanted to say is that there are a lot of reasons for this, of course, and they came up in the interviews and came out in the analysis we conducted. There is a value issue in terms of people are concerned about public opinion. That's important. There is a geopolitical, and Pablo is going to talk a little. Do you have time? Yeah, we do have time. We have 5 minutes. A little bit about that. So a reason for why some companies, because Huawei, this is important, I didn't mention, Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson, they don't apply directly. They apply through a local operator. Entel, Movistar, Telefónica, we have a lot of them. So an issue that happened is that, for example, Movistar decided to stop working with Huawei. Why? Movistar is a Spanish company, and the issue of Huawei in Europe was gaining attention. So they decided to indirectly limit the Huawei's presence when they applied to contracts in Latin America. And that happened a lot. What does it mean is that there is a geopolitical issue that is indirectly affecting Latin America, and it's very important. But also a value issue in terms of public opinion really puts a focus on, oh yes, geopolitical security, US versus China, and that is replicated later in research, and suddenly we all think that the US is a big competitor in 5G when it's really not competing directly in 5G connections and other ones. So I have a couple of examples. Information technologies in Chile and passport application in Chile, the Chile-Japan Trans-Pacific Cable, which was chosen over, Japan was chosen over China, 5G deployment, which was co-engineered with South Korea, neither the US or China, and facial recognition in which Japan, Korea, France, Italy, and the US compete actually in the region. It's not full China or full US or full France, which I think are interesting examples, and that's why I want to give the mic to Pablo.
Thank you. I'm going to speak a couple of minutes trying to complement the presentation of Sascha. Sascha is a very complete investigation about how the Chinese companies are in Latin America. I'm going to speak in the case of Chile a little. We are talking about this thing. We have three arguments: economic, ideological, or geopolitical. But we are trying to understand. For example, in Chile, I think in most of the countries of Latin America, the national security is not included in the geopolitical argument. So when the government or when the state buy, doesn't consider the geopolitical situation. But so much compartmented. So in different stacks, one minister bought this different from another, and they don't consider this technology or the necessary or a link o su estrategia, las estrategias. And doesn't exist a regional strategy about how to confront this problem. For example, in the submarine cable, there could be a more coordination between different countries about how to get information or connect Asia with America. This is a problem. So we don't have economic intelligence. In the case of the Registro Civil, say Sascha, is very important. The government of Chile, I think by economic and technical issue, the contract to ICINA, a empresa para el registro civil. ICINA for the registro civil passport. This is very complicated. The scale, and we saw the government actor reactive to the buy of the technology. When have a diplomatic problem, stay to reverse the problem, to reverse the study. So, for example, in this case, the government in coordination with different diplomatic agencies say, stop, we have to stop and we have to renew the contract with the former and Western enterprise. So this is a problem. For example, other example is the lithium strategy. We continue talking about what to do with the lithium, and the different countries, and China buying and taking all the material. And so we saw with complementary in a couple of minutes what Sascha say is we don't have a strategy. We don't consider the national security problem, the critical infrastructure, for example. So it's a problem. We act not coordinated and reactive to the problem. When the diplomatics, for example, or another country say, hey, stop, please, we have problem. If you transfer information, for example, in the case of the registro civil, we're going to have problem with the act of the passenger and with the data of your biometrical data, etc. Or the connection with internet from Asia to America. This is a case of a problem. So this is my complementary. Thank you.
Thank you. So we started a couple of minutes late, so we have like a couple of minutes more. And yeah, I have. This one. Yeah, so just a disclaimer, this is a very short summary of a 150-page report, so I'm sorry if I left anything out.
Well, that would be the first question, but where can we get the report?
It will be published as a book. I will give you
Okay. A great presentation, very interesting insights here. I don't think I agree with all your conclusions, but let me try to turn this into a question. So what I'm getting from here is that Huawei has a great, sorry, not Huawei, the PRC has a great PR, but a bad advocacy. So they are in our minds like something important in terms of Huawei, for instance, Huawei's presence in 5G and so on in our region, but not in terms of actual investment or in terms of actual presence in infrastructure and so on. While the US is having bad PR, but good advocacy, because their interests in terms of leaving China out of the map is better. I do agree regarding the uncoordination. I mean, and I think that's unfortunately not something new.
Yeah.
We're not coordinated, but I think that regarding China, that's something pretty common in the world. I mean, I see that in the EU, it's exactly the same. There's, there's like one kind of China policy in the EU, but when you go inside the countries, there's a lot of discussion. The case you mentioned about Telefónica doesn't have a policy regarding Huawei. The government of Spain doesn't have a policy towards Huawei, but they left Huawei outside, let's say, just in case. Do you agree with this understanding, and what lessons can we take from that and maybe turn into policy?
Here I am. Very good questions and comments. So yes and yes. On the one side, I think it is true that China does have a presence in Latin America. I don't want to say that they don't have a presence. They do have, but I have a feeling that they're competing at a much more increased level than they want us to think. I think they're struggling to win, for example, some public tenders, and I think they are competing at the same level with France, for example, in facial recognition and cameras, and they are competing with Nokia in the 5G competitions, because to get to the 5G competition in Latin America, you got to have an operating partner. So I don't know how to translate that to companies that you know of, but Telefonica, for example, does need to have an agreement with Huawei in order to Huawei to enter the market. Their private efforts are much wider. So they are building data centers, they're selling phones, and they have a large presence in that regard. But like in terms of contracts, what they try to do is they offer the contract to the government directly, and once the government says yes, they said, okay, but you need to use our technology. We cannot compete. And that's, for example, what Chile had an issue with the Trans-Pacific cable. Huawei came and said, this is the project. And then when Chile said, okay, we're going to launch this public beauty contest, and we can talk about that, they said, no. If you accept our model, then you have to use Huawei technology and nothing else. And that's something even the more technical people in the Chilean government didn't agree with. And they told me, of course, off the record, this is something we really, really didn't like. And this really, really moved us to push for a public tender regarding this issue. Yeah.
One sentence. When you talk with, for example, in Chile, when you talk with Huawei, we are talking with the Chinese government. But when you talk with Microsoft, they say to local reseller. This is a complex about the relationship. So you talk with Huawei, they make advocacy, talk with the politician, but the different Microsoft say, okay, go to the cloud and talk with a reseller around the world.
And yes, and in terms of coordination in the region, what happens in Latin America is that one country takes the lead and the other countries use it as a reference. So for example, with digital television, it was Brazil. The US had the monopoly on television at the time. The NTCS, I think the system, except in Argentina, because Europeans and stuff. And once Brazil chooses Japan as their model for digital television, the whole South American region suddenly chooses to copy that system. And that's something that seems to be also happening with 5G. So Chile did their very successful 5G public tender, and then Colombia actually uses the Chilean framework as a reference. Colombia is a couple of years behind. And of course, Argentina has more a lot of work on that. And actually in Argentina, Huawei had a lot of trials before the whole, China versus the US matter, and then they started to push a little bit against the issue.
The problem with, for example, I looked closely, the problem with the passport or the registro civil was Chile is a small country, a small market, but as Sascha says, if Chile acquired this technology from ICINA, then another country could take the reference, a bigger market and coordination. It's a point of entrance to Latin America.
Yes. So I think we have time for one more question or comment.
Yeah, I would already think. No, go ahead.
No.
I already talked too much.
No, that's the thing. I have too many questions.
We can talk later. We can talk later. I can send you the report.
I think in the report you have because technology is huge.
Yeah.
Do you disaggregate by tech sector?
Yeah. What we did was was comparing 5G, internet connections, and basically the fiber optic cable public tenders.
Okay, so telecommunications infrastructure.
Yeah, telecommunications infrastructure mainly. So this is mainly telecommunications, although in the final report, there are going to be a couple of more deviant cases, I would say.
And a follow-up concerning Telefónica and Movistar, because we did a research from, let's just say from inside Huawei. We talked with a lot of technicians.
At least to our knowledge, Movistar keeps on, Movistar keeps on using Huawei technology in infrastructure.
Reduce previous contracts, yes, but new contracts, no.
Maybe in Chile, because in Colombia, they just signed a recent agreement for network
Maybe.
extension.
I think they're reducing. I mean, at least in Spain, completely not. In Chile, no. In Argentina, I think neither. Yeah, so it might be something they're doing across the region.
And I guess, just recommendation, check by sector, because this was Huawei personnel in Chile, in Spain, and they were working a lot directly with government. Like the cell phone sector, like completely collapsed, but in terms of services, especially services are gonna go on top of 5G network. They're still winning tenders in Spain.
In Spain,
Yeah.
I talked to someone in the Inter-American Development Bank about that, and I think it's a long discussion.
Yeah,
I don't think
exactly,
we can do it in 1 minute, so we can talk about that outside. Yeah. So thank you, everyone.